couple of the lesser known people, maybe we skated over, or if you're like me, you just can hardly remember their names sometimes. We know the big ones, the Davids, the Goliaths, the Sauls. We know those guys, but to know some of the smaller, the smaller space that's given to different people, we can maybe lose some of that. But if you turn to 2 Samuel and chapter 17, I'll just remind us where this lands in the book. This is at the time when David, after his sin with Bathsheba, after the judgment of the Lord is held back from him in the sense that he's not going to die, but God tells him there's going to come these consequences for what you did. You've set things in motion that are going to come back to bite. And they begin to, especially when his own son, Absalom, turns against him and decides to take over the throne. He's going to kill his dad, take over the throne. And that, of course, follows on from another incident when David didn't protect or didn't do anything after his own daughter was assaulted by one of his other sons. I mean, I think today's headlines are a mess. It was as bad back then. But all of this set these things in motion, and so David finally just has to run for it because the forces of Absalom are gathering, and he has to leave Jerusalem. And along the way, there are these people who you see fall on one side or the other, either friends of David or people who are glad this is happening to him, right? And often that's the case when a crisis happens. You know, a crisis shows who your friends are and who is waiting for something like that to happen, sadly. But there were people around, people like Shimei in chapter 16, people who, when David was leaving and fleeing, he took the chance to curse him, to throw dirt and stones, even though he was surrounded by armed men. He said, "This is my chance to say." He just let all of his bile spill out, that he was of the house of Saul and had a lot of unresolved issues. But he came to said, "You're getting everything you deserve, you man of blood." You just throw rocks at him and so on. One of David's men wants to go cut his head off, and he says, "No." He said, "Leave it to the Lord to judge that." But that was Shimei. Then you had another guy named Hushai, who was a great friend, excuse me, in chapter 17, who came and comes as the advisor to David and goes back and advises Absalom and kind of is a bit of a mole in the situation and feeds the right information to David and the wrong information to Absalom and so on. And he comes at just the right time and is a close friend to David in his moment of need. And you have others like Ziba, who's a bit in the middle. He comes as a friend, but really he has his own agenda. But when you come to the end of chapter 17, you have these lesser known guys, and they're the ones I want to concentrate on for a few minutes. Read from verse 21, just to get where we're going. After they had gone, the men came up out of the well and went and told King David. These are the spies who were sent to go from Hushai. They said to David, "Arise and go quickly over the water, for thus and so has Ahithophel counseled against you." Then David arose and all the people who were with him and they crossed the Jordan. By daybreak, not one was left who had not crossed the Jordan. When Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and went off home to his own city. He set his house in order and hanged himself, and he died and was buried in the tomb of his father. Then David came to Mahanaim, and Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. Now Absalom had set Amasa over the army instead of Joab. Amasa was the son of a man named Ithra, the Ishmaelite, who had married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, sister of Zeruiah, Joab's mother. And Israel and Absalom encamped in the land of Gilead. Okay, so a lot of unknown, lesser known people. Oh, Tim, lifesaver. Thank you. Brilliant. A lot of lesser known people there as well. They're not the focus, but it's these next guys. Verse 27. When David came to Mahanaim, Shobi, the son of Nahash, from Rabbah of the Ammonites, and Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lodebar, and Barzillai the Gileadite from Rogelim brought beds, basins, and earthen grain, beans and lentils, honey and curds, and sheep and cheese from the herd for David and the people with him to eat. For they said, the people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. Those guys. You have these men, and we don't know a whole lot about them, but if you look at them each for a moment. Shobi, the son of Nahash, from Rabbah of the Ammonites. Rabbah is what is now Amman, Jordan. So you're crossing the Jordan River. You're in that area that actually David at the time has conquered. These are people who naturally could have been his enemies, but this is someone who sees in David, this is the true king. But that's where he's from. And then Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lodabar. Well, we've heard Lodabar, if you know the story of Mephibosheth, right? He came from that same place. He was actually somebody who had taken in Mephibosheth, was helping Mephibosheth. He was somebody who was kind of used to helping, princeling, royalty on the run. He was somebody who, because of that, he could have been someone who went, oh, this is David's moment. This is it. We'll get Mephibosheth back on the throne and carry on with the household of Saul. But he didn't. He came, and he brings what's necessary for David and his people. He shows a loyalty to the king. And then you have Barzillai. He seemed to be a man, as we read bits and pieces later on, he was a man of quite a bit of means. He had the ability to pull this stuff together pretty quickly, along with these other two. He was somebody from Gilead, so a little ways away. Again, part of Israel, but far enough away, he could have just stayed aloof. Could have just stayed like, not my problem. Gilead first. We'll look at just our own, after our own here, and not worry about anybody else. But he didn't. He came. Now, these guys, when they came, they showed a kind of a loyal friendship to David. And it's interesting in the case of Machir, who was another who I haven't mentioned too. He also, these guys showed this kind of loyalty to someone who they could have just ignored, but they didn't. They showed a loyalty, though, that was appropriate if David really was the true king. If he was really the Lord's anointed, then there was no choice. Of course, you're going to do whatever you can for him. And when these guys came to help, they brought what was needed. They knew ahead of time what would be needed. And if you think about a journey, and you've gone on a journey, and you're tired and you're weary, and especially your plane's been delayed and so on and so on, the thing you want really is your bed. You want a meal, maybe that second, maybe when you wake up, but you want your bed. These people are in the wilderness. They don't have a home to go back to. So it's not just a matter of getting back home. It's what is home anymore? They were refugees, basically. They were on the run. And that kind of provision of need, I think, is something that we need to look out for maybe a little bit more in our own lives and our interactions within Apsley, but also with more people than that, looking more widely. It's the question of, what does hospitality mean? What does it look like? I think sometimes there's an idea of hospitality as, and it can mean this, but it can mean, sort of B&B style. You can come, you can stay, you can have very comfortable kind of time, or, a big meal and all of these things and lots of space. And okay, it can mean that. But these guys, for instance, weren't having anybody to their house. They were taking the provision to them. The first question, I think, with hospitality has to be, what is the need? What is the need that we see other people having? And then the second question that comes with that is, has the Lord put anything in my hands that I can use to meet that need? I know people in my life who have been amazingly helpful, and I've never been in their house. But they've sat down maybe over a cup of coffee somewhere, or chatting on the phone, and brought me what I needed in that moment. Provided the encouragement, or the listening ear, or whatever it is. They have provided what I needed then, without ever kind of even sitting down to a meal or having me stay in their house or anything like that. But do you think for a moment of some of the homes that were open to Christ when he was here? You know, there was Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, famously. There was Peter's wife's mother-in-law. There was the home where the upper room was. There were places that he could go, but the point was that there were people who shared what they had with him. And look what happened as a result. Look what he was able to do with it. They were places that allowed the Lord Jesus to do his work. The work that changed people's lives, that changed the destiny of the world, that changed individual destinies, that shaped people. And I think it's worth asking, is that how we consider our home or our time, the opportunities that we have to share with people? I know there are many in here who do that, but I think we always have to come back and say, Lord, what is it that you want me to do with what you've given me? Because it's all yours, Lord. And it's interesting, we don't always have to provide for others on our own. It's interesting that these three guys got together. I mean, maybe one of them was well enough off, but it's interesting to band together sometimes as believers in the Lord's anointed, as these three were, and to say, there's a need, let's get together and meet it. Maybe that means practically sharing, as we do here with Fellowship Lunch, and getting involved in those things. Maybe it means saying, this is kind of the social situation doesn't work for me here just to do this on my own, but can we team up and provide some meals, or I'll provide the meal and you deliver it, or if that's what it's needed. Maybe it means that there are times when somebody needs a certain amount of counseling, but either you're single or you don't have the time, or the situation doesn't quite work as it is, and say, well, who has the Lord provided around me that I can team up with? These three guys teamed up with, and look at the result. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, two sisters and a brother. I don't know how normal that was in that world to have that setup of a home situation. Maybe it was. But they had a certain amount in their home, and they said, this is all the Lord's. What are we going to do with it? He's welcome here anytime. That's one thing. And then, oh, look, he's got a bunch of disciples with him these days. Okay, they're welcome as well. And they just gave what they had. I love the fact that when the Lord uses something, when he goes to do something, he often used what was at hand. So you think about the time more than one time, but when he fed people. He could have, by the divine prerogative given to him, as far as I understand it, I don't think there was any reason he couldn't have, just kind of gone, there it is. But you listen to him and he says, right, they're hungry, there's the need. Okay, what do you guys have? Not much. Here's a few loaves and fish. That'll do. Takes that, multiplies that, and makes what those people had the means of meeting the need. And there's a tremendous lesson in that, because the need is overwhelming. And sometimes the need is so great that it is tempting to just kind of hunker down and go, let's survive this. But to say, Lord, give me your heart to see the needs around, whatever those are, physical or spiritual, mental health, whatever those are, and to say, Lord, I don't have enough. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough energy. I don't have enough of my own mental health. Whatever it is, I don't have enough. But you do. And the first thing he'll probably turn around and say, what do you have? What time do you have, or what money, or what opportunities? What do you have that you'll put at my disposal? Because I think in that way, when we start to ask those questions, we get an idea, a broader picture, maybe a more biblical idea of what hospitality is, of sharing what is needed, what we have, and to put it in the Lord's hands and let Him multiply it as much as He needs to. Because we shouldn't just stop with the question of, what am I capable of providing? What do I have enough of to be able to provide? I think instead we need to see the need very clearly and then ask the Lord, well, how can I be part of the answer? How can I be part of that? And the hospitality that these men showed, it stands obviously opposite the kind of antagonism of Shimei and casting stones. It's a good contrast to that. But also against this guy Ziba, who's kind of pretending to be a friend so he can get what he wants and get Saul's estate and all of that. But I think what they did, it was necessary for survival, but it had to, I think, bring a measure of healing to David's soul in that moment. Imagine it, your own son's out to kill you. You're running with those you can take with you, and you don't know what's next. You're placing yourself in the Lord's hands, yes, but you don't know where you're going next. And sometimes we find ourselves in places in life like that, and I know I have, and I'm sure you have too, when it's just because of either something that's been done wrong to you, or because of sin that you've committed, or because just life and the uncertainty of it and what's next. And you place yourself in the Lord's hands, but very often I have found the way He assures and reassures is to use somebody. I've never had a direct revelation from the Lord. Some of you will be very glad to hear that. All of you probably. I think I have in His Word, and He speaks very clearly in those ways. But do you know, some of the clearest times is when, through another brother or sister, they come alongside and share something with me that I needed in that moment. Usually a word, something I needed to hear. Sometimes it's been even funds in my younger years, something that was like, oh, didn't expect that. He has a way of using His people, and He seems to like to do it that way, to use us to meet those needs. But for David in that moment to be running and have that uncertainty, and then for these people to come along and say, we thought you had a need, here you go. It had to say more than that, wow, I've got friends. It had to say to him, the Lord's in control. And it had to help him to reassure him in his own faith in the Lord. And can you imagine, to be able to do that with a piece of bread, to be able to do that with a bed, to do that with all the different basins and earthen vessels and wheat and butter. This is practical stuff. And to use the means of those kinds of things to actually to point to someone who has their whole life in His hands and to say, remember, He's got you. Remember, He's there. And we all need that at times. And the Lord said, didn't He? Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. And then He says, you're my friends if you do what I command you. This is how you show it. To love like this, to love by laying down, to love by giving. So practically, I think the challenge for me is, am I aware of what other people's needs are? And I try to be, at times. I'm a very selfish person, very self-centered. But am I aware? Am I looking? Am I saying, Lord, make me more like you in that way? I need to see where the needs are, what they lack at the moment. And am I willing to put whatever I have into Christ's hands and just to see what He will do with it? Say, Lord, what can you do with that? It isn't much, but what will you do with that specifically to make yourself known to this person? To take this little thing that you've asked of me and to say, I can do something with that for eternity. Lord, I want to see that. I want to see how you'll do that. So simple thoughts, perhaps. I find it a challenge to my own heart. I think maybe if there's another practical thing we can say, just even in terms of Apsley, is just watching out for visitors that come to make sure they're, we're not overwhelmed. Not everybody likes to have 6 invitations to dinner or something like that, but just to look out for them, to make sure we meet them and talk to them. And I would just encourage us here, it is done well here. But there's always people that we can keep finding the needs and trying to meet them. So take it as a challenge. I'm mainly pointing at me. But as each of us as part of this body plays our part in this work, I think we'll see the Lord draw more people to himself, meet their needs, and one day just be thanking him for what he did through his people.